the act of carrying out violence in the civilian population for the purpose of creating terror for a political purpose. So terrorism, supporting national liberation organizations, is not an act of terrorism. It's just not. Whether we disagree with that or not is a separate issue, but it's just not an act of terrorism. I would add that there are close U.S. allies. You named Saudi Arabia, for example. That if we were to hold the Saudis to the same definition, look at Israel, that has carried out assassinations all over the world. We could even point the finger at the government of India, for that matter, for carrying out assassinations and terrorist attacks in Canada, blowing up a 747, no less. So really, the complaint that I have with this designation, this terrorism designation, is that because we've manipulated the definition so many times over the years, and we've used that designation as a cudgel against countries that we don't like or whose policies we disagree with, it's become meaningless to place a group or a country on the list of terrorists. It means nothing now in the end. Right. I mean, Israel is, in my view, an extreme example. I mean, if you happen to be an Iranian military official or nuclear scientist or businessman who is carrying out trade that the government of Israel disagrees with, and you happen to be in Vienna or London or Dubai, for example, you can easily be assassinated by Israeli officers there as you could be in the center of Tehran. And let's talk about the center of Tehran. The Israelis use cutouts. They use recruited assets on the ground to carry out acts of terrorism in the center of Tehran, targeting military officials.
Explain what a cutout is.
A cutout is a person recruited to carry out an action that gives the initiator of the action plausible deniability. So, for example, if you don't want to send an Israeli intelligence officer into Tehran, you assess that the risk is too high. You recruit, let's say, an Afghan refugee to do it. He might do it for $100. Or you recruit somebody that's already in Iran, maybe an Iranian national who has the ability to come and go. Perhaps you recruit that person in Dubai and send it back to Tehran to carry out this act. But there are a million ways to commit acts of terrorism, and the Israelis use a lot of them. Decades. Chris, I'm so glad that you brought up the MEK, because I feel like I've been the only one talking about the MEK in recent months, and nobody knows what in the world I'm talking about. The MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq, is a terrorist group that's been around since the 1960s. It's more of a cult than anything else. It was formed by a husband and wife team in the late 1960s to carry out terrorist attacks in Iran. Now, these attacks weren't just against the Shah and the Shah's governmental officials. There were attacks against Americans, against the American ambassador, for example, in Tehran, against the highest-ranking U.S. Army general posted in Iran, a lieutenant general. And immediately the MEK was feted in Washington, in New York, in London. Hillary Clinton used her influence to get the Brits to lift the terrorist designation, the French and others. And then the MEK leadership was very
smart in that it recognized the need to hire high-powered lobbyists in Washington, and our government hates the Ayatollahs. Now, this led to a bigger problem, in my view. We know that the Israelis have provided an inordinate amount of so-called intelligence to the U.S. government since the beginning of this conflict with Iran. I use air quotes around intelligence because in my view, a great deal of it is just made up out of thin air. For example, this ridiculous assertion that there are Iranian terrorist sleeper cells in cities all across the United States. I can't tell you how many emails I've received from people in such disparate locations as Cleveland, Ohio,
and Honolulu, Hawaii, and Oklahoma City, and Denver, and Miami, asking, is it true that there are Iranian terrorist cells embedded in my city? No, it's not true. That was a lie that the Israelis made up to convince the American people that we needed to overthrow this government in Tehran, number one. Number two, Miriam Rajavi takes Israeli money. The Israelis brag about it in their media. Miriam Rajavi tells the Israeli government that the people of Iran are on the brink of an uprising. All the government needs is a little shove. It's a house of cards. It's going to topple when the first missile flies, and there will be democracy and everybody will live happily ever after. And anybody with any brain, anybody who has ever followed developments in Iran would have been able to say that that was preposterous, that no such thing would happen. A third point, I was intimately involved in the planning for the 2003 Iraq War, something of which I'm not at all proud. I was the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations. One of the things that I learned then, I guess I already knew it, but I learned it definitively, was that the United States, no matter its intent, will never be seen as a liberator. It will be seen as an invader and an occupier. And so for the average Iranian, it is better for them to live with a system that they have now than to risk the chaos that invariably comes from an American Israeli. I can only imagine what the average Iranian thinks about a joint invasion by the United States and Israel.
The Israeli objective appears in Iran different from the American objective. I mean, who knows what the objective is? I'm not sure Trump knows. But they would like to see the regime changed.
You're exactly right about the Israelis. The Israelis believe that they benefit from surrounding countries being mired in chaos. For example, in Syria, a pogrom against minority communities, whether they're Druze or Christian or what have you. And that's supposed to be better for whom? In Iraq, the same thing. The Israelis were threatened by a central government led by Saddam Hussein. They benefited from chaos. If their view was if Iraqis are busy killing each other, they're not going to be a threat to Israel. They won't threaten to kill Israelis. We saw the same thing happen in Libya. Now we're seeing the same thing happen in Iran. I think that you're exactly right that the Israelis really want at the end of this. We've missed issue after issue after issue on which we could have cooperated with the Iranians. We could have cooperated with the Iranians on counterterrorism, on counter proliferation, even counter narcotics. I've told the story, Chris, many times. When I was and so I flew out to Bagram Air Base. They were waiting for me. They weren't happy about it, but I said that I needed to fly to Kandahar and then to Helmand province, the capital of Lashkar Gah, in order to do this study. I wanted to go into the poppy fields. I wanted to interview farmers. They hated the idea. It's the only time in my career that I ever pulled rank on someone. And I said, look, with all due respect, because I'm a senior congressional staff member, I have brigadier general status, and I am ordering you to fly me to Kandahar and Lashkar Gah. And we got in the helicopter and we went. Well, when we get to Lashkar Gah, we get into a couple of jeeps and with a translator, a security detail, we go into the poppy fields and we stumble on a poppy farmer. And I asked him what in retrospect was a very naive question.
Angrily, he said, the Americans told me in 2001 that if I told them where the Arabs were, I could do all the poppy I wanted. I said, what Americans told you could grow poppy. And as soon as those words came out of my mouth, my military handler said, meeting's over, we're under flag, which we want. He pulled me back to the jeep, and we went out to the base. And I had to fly down to Helmand to the base. At Bagram. In any event, I fly back to Washington. I read a very strongly worded report, and I sent it to a friend of mine at the Drug Enforcement Agency. And he calls me back a few days later, and he said, buddy, you know you're never going to get this published, right? And I said, why not? And he said, Afghanistan produces 93% of the world's heroin. Almost all of that heroin goes to Iran and Russia.
And we want them to be addicted to heroin. It weakens their societies. And of course, Senator Kerry would never allow it to be published. and I had to kill it. Well, here we are all these years later, and we cannot get a handle on our fentanyl problem. The fentanyl that we deal with is made in China. And why won't the Chinese work with us to stop it? Because they want us to be addicted to fentanyl. It weakens our society. So here we're in this position where we tried to wreck Iranian society for decades, rather than to go to the trouble of cooperating, rather than going to the trouble of trying to identify common ground where we could work with them and maybe begin to improve relations, which have been so poor since 1979. We elected instead to try to get their people addicted to heroin, maybe have some of them die, work with the Israelis to assassinate their scientists and their military leaders, and just let them devolve into a chaos that we hoped would last for many years. I think that's exactly right. Because then those people are easier to attack politically and easier to isolate. I think that's exactly what the plan was. Yeah, and another part of the plan, and this is something that has become, that has sort of moved into the arena of public discourse, is, you're anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Semitic, Tucker Carlson's anti-Semitic. Everybody who doesn't agree with the Likud line or the farther to the right line in the Likud coalition government is an anti-Semite. I have a good friend who was an IDF special forces officer, is now an American citizen and married to an American, and he told me that he was actually taught in school to automatically accuse anybody who criticized Israel in any way of anti-Semitism, that it served to silence dissent, and people just aren't buying it anymore.
Do you have any idea, or had you heard in your years in the CIA, what is the quality of Iranian intelligence? Is it considered a good or weak, or do you have any idea?
Yeah, it's considered to be one of the less effective services, and the Pakistani military. That is not to say that they don't actively support a myriad of terrorist groups. They do. I've always said that it's as though there are two parallel Pakistani intelligence services, ISI. There is the half that I worked with, and then you go to the ISI headquarters, and you see some of these guys with very long beards. They're the ones who financed the attacks on the Jewish Center in Mumbai and the Western hotels in Mumbai. Bona fide terrorists. But the Pakistanis are our friends when it comes to Al-Qaeda. So yeah, there's a lot of very poor planning. We could say the same thing about the Indians, in that the Indians support their own Kashmiri separatist groups, extremist groups, and it's the Indians that blew up this 747 in Canada. It's the Indians that carry out hits or attempted hits against Sikh activists or Indian leftists or anti-Hindu nationalists in places like Canada or the UK. There's plenty of blame to go around, and not to even yes, they did clear out a lot of the old timers, the assassins, the coup plotters, the MK Ultra, Dr. Mengelas, and obsessed with Central America. And the next thing you know, the CIA is overseeing a secret war in Central America, and cocaine is somehow magically finding its way into American society. So was there really a golden age? If there was, it only lasted for a minute.